Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Soul Symphony. Thank you for tuning in. So this is just part two of my life. My life story. I kind of went over part one on a previous video. So if you want to check it out before you come and check this one out, that would be great. So again, just as a reminder, I'm making these videos to help in your healing journey if you're on one. If you're not on one, that's okay too. And whenever you decide to get on one, the information is here for you. Now, yesterday I did talk a little bit about my childhood and some of my adulthood yesterday on last video, I should say. But today or in this video, I'll just continue on that. Okay. So I did talk a little bit about my marriage of over 15 years, which was with a covert narcissist. And unfortunately, at the time, I did not know what covert narcissist, I didn't even know what a narcissist was. Okay, I did not know. But unfortunately, when you grow up in tumultuous households, you don't have that model showing you or telling you how relationships should be. So you grew up thinking that it should be hard, that if I just try harder, if I change certain things, if I put in more effort, if I show up more, right, that things will actually eventually even up and be better. But unfortunately, when you that's the saddest part about growing up in a traumatic household, is that we do not see it as abnormal. We just see it as a normal thing. Well, you have to do most of the things. You have to take care of so many things. You don't have the support, emotional, physical. You don't have sometimes even the financial support, right? But you are trying still to maintain a stable household, a balanced household. You try to make sure everybody's okay. And that's the people pleasing part of things, right? That's the people pleasing part of things. And that's also how an empath can end up, unfortunately, in a narcissistic, abusive relationship. Actually, all narcissistic relationships are abusive. It's just that the degree of an abuse might be different. It's kind of on a spectrum. Some are at the lowest side, some are at the middle, some are at the high end, right? So that's just the difference. But when it comes to covert narcissism, unfortunately, in my case, it's more of, it's subtle. It's not something that we see really. It's not chaotic, really. It's very subtle. That's again the manipulation, right? The illusions, manipulation, gaslighting, and then you end up, in my case for sure, I end up by a certain time, I did end up not actually even liking who I was, right? Because I lost parts of myself in that relationship, trying to change so many things, trying to adjust to so many things, just to make sure that the household is balanced. My children don't grow up in a different household, or with their parents being in two different households, right? Because that was my case. I grew up in a household that my mother and my father, they were not there in the same household. By age 5, I was my parents have divorced, so I had to grow up with my dad partly, and who was already married. And and my stepmother, she was just on the probably high end of the narcissism spectrum that I did talk about. But at the time, again, I didn't know what narcissism was to begin with, because I was just a kid. So that's just that sometimes it's a good idea for us to go back in our childhood and just pay attention to little things, to be able to pinpoint actually what actually even push us to be in these abusive relationships. Sometimes it's not weakness. It's absolutely not weakness. If there is anything, it's conditioning. I won't call it conditioning, because we're conditioned since we're children to not have the model. No one is modeling a healthy relationship. No one is modeling a healthy motherhood. No one is modeling a healthy fatherhood. So therefore, it's very hard for us once we're adults to get in a relationship and being able to actually create even a relationship that's healthy. Sustaining it, that's a whole different topic, right? You have to be able to create it first in order for you to even maintain it. So we cannot even create one because we do not know what a healthy one looks like. And unfortunately, that's what makes us end up into again, abusive relationships with emotional abusers, physical abusers, narcissists, right? Relationships, people who just, and all different kind of abusers in general. That's what predisposes us because of our nervous system. There is this familiarity. Our nervous system is familiar. It's familiar to those conditions, right? So therefore, we're more likely to navigate through that without really seeing it as a situation that's abnormal and try to seek help or try to even exit. Sometimes there's no help you need. Just exit. In my case, we tried, right? Because again, if I knew at the time, I was just thinking, well, we can work this out maybe, and let's go to counseling, right? We went to several counseling sessions, marriage counseling, in several years, actually, 5 years total, and not back to back, but 5 years total within our over 15 years of marriage. But it did not work out because every time, actually, our fourth one, I would say, I start seeing the pattern. There was a pattern. It was more like a checkbox for them. It's more like, well, because the whole thing is to maintain a certain image, right? The certain image is I'm the good guy. I do everything for my family, and specifically for covert narcissism. I have seen that. Like, it's more like I am the good guy here. I'm doing everything I can, and I'm providing for my family. You can see me. I'm doing what I need to do. I'm even going to counseling, trying to make sure that we work out. So therefore, and again, therefore, there's no suspicion of that person is actually the person who is causing certain things, right? So it's like that perfect image. Everybody in the family or the family members or relatives or friends, neighbors, everybody thinks, oh, that person is an impeccable husband, right? Or impeccable wife, right? But on the other hand, they're not the one living with the person. So even when you go and tell people, actually, because at some point I didn't even know how to even tell people what I was going through. That's another thing. It's very hard to explain to people what you're going through when there is this facade of perfect household, this facade of perfect spouse, right? So therefore, people are more likely to say, oh no, we don't think that person is the problem. You must be the problem because you're the one complaining about what's going on. You're the one complaining about what's going on. So therefore, you must be the one who has that problem, because from outside, that person is being seen as that perfect gentleman, right? That perfect lady, right? So therefore, it's very hard. The covert narcissistic relationships is very hard to not only live in, to navigate, to try to go outside, to seek, to tell family members, to even to just identify it. It's very hard to even identify it. And I have lived it, so therefore I realized that. And I had two friends who even lived the same thing. And actually, after I found out my case, that's when I talked to them. We were talking once in a while. We'll talk about what's going on in our lives. But then I have seen, after I found out what I was going through, what it was, and then I brought it up to their attention. I was like, hey, by the way, have you considered this? Have you considered that your spouse might be a covert narcissist? Because at the end of the day, we're going through very similar things. Just that we were going through similar things at different times. Different times because, again, there was, I was over 15 years of marriage. There's one of them over 20. The other one was around 10 or less than 10. So we had to kind of talk about it. And that's when I was like, wow, it's horrible how so many people, just in my case, I know at least 6 people who've been through similar things over time. But at the time that I find out, I talked to those 2 other people, those 2 other friends or people about my situation and about my findings. And that kind of helped them go into also researching their own situations and putting 2 and 2 together and maybe figure out an exit plan. Because in those cases, really staying to even try to make things work is more damaging, especially if there are children. especially when there are children involved. That's the saddest part. When there are children involved, it's even harder, because in my case, for sure, it was very hard for me to leave because I did not know. Even though in the beginning, well, by year 5 of our marriage, by the 5th year, for sure, I have seen certain things that I did not know if I could stay longer. But then there was always this going back to my child, my child, my child. I did not want my child to struggle and suffer in a household where I'm not there with that child, or just both parents, because I lived that case. And I always told myself growing up that if both my parents were in the same household, maybe things would have been better. Maybe at least we would not be abused at the extent that we were abused. Certain things, the basic needs, just the basic needs that we did not get. And I always told myself that maybe if our parents were both in the same household, maybe certain things could have been avoided. But at the end of the day, I came to realize later on over time that it's actually more detrimental for children to even be there, because what they do is they pick up certain patterns from that narcissistic parent. Even if they're not narcissists later on in life, they end up having narcissistic traits. That's just the problem. The biggest problem is that they might not be a full-blown narcissist, but they will have narcissistic traits. So that's one of the things that I have realized over time, that I was like, yeah, I should have just, when I find out, I should have just, but again, when you don't know, you don't know. Now, regrets is the worst thing sometimes in life to try to sit down and ponder on, right? The best thing is to understand that everything in life is for a reason. Everything I went through, I do not see myself as a victim. That's number one. I never seen myself as a victim. I always saw it as, I'm going through this for a reason. There is nothing in life that happens as a coincidence. That has always been my philosophy. That has always been my philosophy, and that has always made me seek the reason of things, the why we exist to begin with. What's my purpose, right? Because I was not just born for no reason. No one is born for no reason. But the sad part is, most of us, we're born, we grow up, we get old, and we die. And we never, ever get to actually know our purpose in life. We don't. Because of life circumstances, because of blockages, because of different things in life that block us from even being able to even think that way, to see that everything in life happens for a reason. But instead, we live day-to-day life, living for we live our lives for working. We live our lives for other people. We live our lives for any and everything tangible. But we don't really never sit down and think about what's actually our purpose in life. What's my purpose in life? What should I do for myself? What's my purpose? Am I living for me? Because the whole point of living for yourself is to actually, first of all, for you to live for yourself is for you to figure out who you are. Who you are. Figure out who you are. Figure out what you love. Figure out what's your worth. Figure out how you can contribute to your own life first. And then your purpose follows. Once you figure yourself out, you figure who you are, deep down who you are, the rest of it just follows. And we stop living for people. We stop living for material things. We stop living for just to work, to go to a job 8 to 5, right? We stop living for that. We live fully in our purpose. And once we live in our purpose, and most of the time, our purpose is something we actually will love. It's something that comes with love, something that comes with satisfaction, something that comes with no burden, we would not actually, it has a very, I would say, low percentage of just giving up on life, right? Because when we're happy, and happiness too, it comes with happiness. When you're happy, you're not just gonna give up on life. You are expanding in life. You are trying to do more. You're trying to benefit other people. Because once you're happy, once you're in your purpose, once you are where you're supposed to be mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, right? It just radiates. It just shows. And once it shows, you can actually help other people because you are not really sitting in your own sorrows. We're not sitting in our own sorrows. We're not trying to still figure out how to unravel our life, right? From all the different kinks and turns and blockages that's we're sitting in, right? And in that sense, again, the healing part, that's where it comes into play. We have to heal. In order for us to heal, we have to know our trauma. We have to know our trauma in order for us to heal. And in order for us to get to our purpose, we have to heal. We have to be able to not have all those blockages, internal blockages, external blockages too, because family is part of those blockages too sometimes. Family, friends. And when we're not healed, we're more likely to stay in environments that is not actually suitable for our expansion, for our growth. And we stay in those environments. Family, friends, co-workers, certain jobs, right? So that's the biggest thing. That's the biggest thing for me, that when I started my healing journey, figuring out, actually way before I started my healing journey, when I figured out specifically that I was with a narcissist and in a narcissistic relationship, I had to do a lot of research on what's going on, because for me it was an eye opener. It was literally an eye opener, and I did not know, and I was like, wow. And again, I just didn't know. And when you don't know, you just don't know. And so there is no, unfortunately, in my case, it was very hard for me to exit. Even though God gave me several different avenues, several different ways to exit, it was just a hard thing because, again, children were involved, right? So children were involved. It was harder. And then eventually, that's when, which I did not realize at the time, and because I like I was saying in the previous video, I love learning. That has always been something that had kept me in my entire life of abusive relationships, family, friends, platonic, right, relatives. During all those times, for me, reading was an escape. Learning was not only an escape, but for me to be able to understand things, to be able to have a different perspective in life, to be able not to stay in that gloomy state of being hurt, being hurt, being put down, being traumatized. So the reading and the learning and going to the library, especially when I was a kid. When I was a child, I used to spend every minute that I could in the library. I was not the regular child who had like a doll, who had like coloring crayons, who had like painting, who did all those things. No, I just I was a bookworm. I always been a bookworm. So, and that was something I could always relate, because I used to always not relate to actually books, fiction books, mostly fictional stories. And that was a way for me to escape. That was a way for me to have always a mental escape from what I was going through, from the type of household I was in. I was always, so that right there was actually what gave me always hope. It always, all the stories I have read when I was a kid, I have always seen it as there is a bigger picture to life than the little bubble I was in. There's a bigger picture that for me, it has always been, there is something bigger out there. This little bubble gonna burst one day. And once it bursts, I'll be able to be in that bigger space that I don't have access to still. Where that bigger space have more options. That bigger space might have more positive things. That bigger space might have way other things that I do not have here, that I don't have access to. That bigger space will have happiness. That bigger space will have people who are different, who will be different than these people here who live their entire lives doing nothing but traumatizing people. right? And also now looking back at all of that, the people who have caused us all the trauma, caused me the trauma, caused my siblings the trauma, they were not healed too. They were unhealed people. And unhealed people do not know but better sometimes. Sometimes they do know better, but unfortunately, sometimes they just enjoy inflicting pain. Sometimes they absolutely know better. They just inflict pain for just the sake of inflicting pain, for the sake of feeling good, for the sake of dopamine. Sometimes it's a dopamine kick for them, unfortunately. But for me, I had to understand that. Eventually, I had to understand that. Some people are built different. And it's not, no, it's not my job, it's not your job, it's nobody's job to try to make somebody heal, to try to make somebody. Now you can suggest it, especially if they're family members, you can bring it up. You can suggest it if they're a spouse, you can for sure suggest it. Hey, counseling, hey this, hey that. But we cannot bring people to the therapist, right? We cannot force people to go sit down and introspectively look within themselves to see what wounded them, to see why they're behaving the way they behave, to see why they actually spend so much time causing trauma to other people, right? Abusing other people. We cannot make them do that. What we can do, we can suggest it, we can bring it up, we can encourage, right? But we cannot bring them to go actually sit down and listen to their inner self, to be able to see what wounded them to begin with, what hurt them to begin with, for them to actually perpetrate that hurt, to spread that hurt out there, right? Instead of healing. That's one thing we cannot do. That's just a sad reality, but that's how it is. We can encourage, we can spread the word, we can share content, we can share books, we can share whatever else, right? Resources. But again, until those people, the people who are hurt, until they decide to actually heal for themselves, right? And also, they should not heal. You shouldn't heal for nobody else. You should do it for yourself. Healing is a self thing, because once you decide to heal for yourself, you are more likely to actually maintain reverting back to who you were, right? Maintain not going back to the same addiction, the same dopamine hit, the same way of being, right? So therefore, we are more likely to maintain it by being aware that when we're doing certain things, or when we're put in certain situations that actually can create a conflict within us that might push us to revert back, that we can actually be not only mindful of those environments, mindful of avoiding those circumstances, and making sure that we actually see it and just exit that environment or exit that situation, right? Not exiting is not running. Exiting is just telling us, hey, it's like saying somebody who's, who has an alcohol addiction, right? The worst thing that person is going to AA, that person is making sure that, they're drinking enough water, they're not, they maintaining themselves, they eating healthy, they try to meditate maybe to keep their stress low, because most people who actually go to certain addictions is stress related. It can be also trauma related, to try to forget those memories, right? That during the trauma. So, but let's say, for example, that's just an example. That person, right, is trying their very best. Now, the worst place that person can go is a bar. A bar where you have plenty of choices when it comes to alcoholic drinks, right? And that can be a trigger. Now, some people can go that just to maybe just as a proof to themselves that they're over it, right? That they are not going to fall back into it again, and just maybe order water or a Coke, right? That's a great thing. But not everybody is at that level to say, hey, you know what? I'm on my healing journey so much that my triggers don't trigger me anymore. So that's the same thing again for healing. That's the same exact thing, right? Because certain things are triggers for us. When we're not healed, certain things trigger us. And then once it's trigger us, then we kind of can revert back to the way we used to be, an old way of being. right? So now let me just go ahead and finish up the story about my marriage, right? When I decided to exit, which was actually not very long ago, right? Actually, for 4 years, it was a mutual agreement, which I also did not know. With narcissistic relationships, there's no such a thing as a mutual agreement, because at the end of the day, the entire thing is to control the older person. The older person is under control. That's just the mentality of a narcissist. Most narcissists, well, I'll say, at least in my experience, it was a control thing. It was about, no, I'm going to manipulate you. I'm going to go ahead and gaslight you. I'm going to go ahead and sell you dreams, sell you illusions in order to control you so you don't go nowhere, right? But then when I realized that things were not working and I wanted us to amicably go our separate ways for the sake of our children. But then at the time, again, I did not know the narcissistic portion of things. I did not know that also when it comes to that, the control does not allow you, the control they want upon you would not allow any fair treatment. Because in order for us to have a mutual agreement that things are not working, let's go our separate way, there has to be some kind of fairness to that, right? But there is no fairness possible when one person is trying to control the situation and making sure that that situation is actually working in their favor 100% of the time. So there's no such a thing. So in my case, that's what it was. But it was more like, mutually, it wasn't a mutual agreement 4 years ago, right? That, hey, because I was in school at the time, I just started school in healthcare professional school for my second master's, and my second master's degree, which the first one it was, again, a whole different story. And then that was the second one, which actually required me to move completely 5 hours away from my marital home, right? So I moved 4 or 5 hours away. And I did not know at the time God was actually giving me an exit plan. That's what it was. But I did not know that was actually an opportunity for an exit plan. Even though we did agree at the time that we're done, that once I'm done with school, because the school was so stressful, it was very stressful. It was very, very paced, like very fast paced school. I had so many sleepless nights that there were weeks that I would sleep literally, like I'll have 2 days without really sleeping 5 hours, right? In 2 days. Because we'll have tests, especially the first year, tests back to back to back to back to back to back to back. And so it was very taxing on my body, my mental. It was very taxing. Anyone in that school, it was taxing on everybody. I was not the only one. So, but I did not want to add an extra stress to my schooling. So I was like, you know what? We decided, or I thought we decided, that was a mutual agreement that we're not going to do any divorce until I finish school. Now, when I finished school, we started the proceedings. Now, I had some of my personal items still at the marital house. I showed up, and there was a case where this person literally decided to try to pin a case on me, right? A criminal case on me, that so that not only I would lose my daughter for the custody of my daughter, but I would not be able to actually practice with my degree that I just finished not very long before that instance. So that's when that right there was, and it was very much premeditated. Very much premeditated. Very much so. And in that instance, that's what I think opened up my eyes even more to understand actually how dangerous things can be. Because That in that situation, I could lose my freedom completely. Not only my losing my daughter's custody, but losing my freedom completely. For what though? That's the part I was like, just because we agreed that we leaving, and I came to get only my things and to just mind my business, So it's in cases like that it's very important for us to understand the type of abusive relationships we're in. And sometimes it might sound or might look like certain decisions are mutually understood, but they might not be. So that's why very much our discernment is very important. Not only our discernment, but our knowledge of the type of abusive relationship we're in. Our knowledge of the different patterns. Just to understand that if we decide to leave a relationship or a marriage or whatever that is, right, that has been abusive in the past, what would happen? Kind of just see a little bit, have a foresight, being able to see ahead and tell yourself or telling ourselves what would happen the day I decide to leave, like literally pack my things and leave. What do I see? What can I see happening at the time? And so once we have an idea of that, it's very much a great, it's very much advisable for us to be able to create a plan, an exit plan, a safe exit plan. Not any plan is safe, especially in certain abusive relationships, especially if we know that the person who is abusing us, depending on what they might have some mental health issues on top of it. They might have, all the things on top of it. If there are weapons in the house, all that stuff, is something that to be very much mindful of. And again, when we don't know, we just don't know. And that's where I always told my kids, knowledge is power. If you know, you know. If you don't know, you're left behind. That's how it goes. If you do not know, you are left behind. Because unless you know that there's a direction to take, unless you know that there is somewhere to go, you would not know, right? Only the people who know will be heading that direction, will be heading that way, and they will be successful at arriving to where they're going. When you don't know, you don't know. You'll be sitting in the back, waiting and waiting and waiting and not knowing nothing. So therefore, you'll be left behind. So knowledge is absolutely power, not only in every situation. I believe in every situation in life, knowledge is power. Because I believe that if there's anything that I would say is priceless when it comes to, if there is a price tag to put on it, I would say it doesn't have a price tag, because it is powerful. It doesn't have a price tag. That's why I do not mind working one job and a half, going to school, finding different avenues. There are so many different avenues out there to pay for student loans if we decide to go to school, or to there are jobs that will also pay for the schooling. But the thing is to just know what our purpose is first. Once we know what your purpose is, certain trainings are necessary. And in my case, I believe that in many situations, what I have learned over my academic years have saved my life in many, many different ways. In many, many different ways. Not only the financial stability, not only to have financial stability at all, but it's more like just the knowledge that I gained from it. I can apply it to so many different aspects of my life and teach my children too. And teach them also. Me going to school and me learning has never been about even the grade. At some point, I think it was when I was in my perfectionism era, where I had to have straight A and all this and all that. But I came to realize later, not very long after I started schooling, that the grade is awesome. The grade is a way to validate myself. It's a way to validate myself that I learned the topic, I know the topic, I know the material, and therefore the grade is there to show me, to validate my knowledge of the material. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is not to validate myself, it's actually just know the material. To know the material, because the knowledge of the material goes way beyond the classroom. It goes beyond the classroom. It goes beyond the school itself. It kind of trickles a little bit everywhere in our lives. Everywhere in our lives, right? And so that's just unfortunately, my marriage. For me, that it hurt at some point, I believe, but the hurt was not even the hurt mostly was the fact that I would not even call it hurt. I would say more like shock, maybe, that people actually put so much energy, time, and invest, I would say even money, because to have to spend all that energy and time and making up things and spreading it through social media and spreading it, and sitting down, spending all that time, bullying somebody that you don't even know online. You don't even know that person. You don't know their lives. You only know what somebody told you, who somebody else told to, right? So therefore, where are the facts? For me personally, I was like, I don't know. I don't live my life like that. So I would not even try to involve myself with that. But the only thing is that maybe it was a shocker, It hurt maybe a little bit in the sense that I did, so that I saw the person as a friend, I would say. At least a friend, If anything, maybe just a friend, At the least a friend. But then, again, when you don't know, you just don't know. So that's, again, another thing for me and the part, again, that if it was just that, honestly, I wouldn't even bother. But the fact that I had my identity stolen by the lover. Yes, I had my identity stolen by the lover. So therefore, I was like, well, the lover doesn't know me. So how the heck did she get my information to begin with to steal my identity? Credit cards were open on my name because I investigated when I was working on something, on something that I needed to use actually my credit, to run my credit for it. And then my credit went down over 100 points. So I was like, what is this? The last time I checked, I was not that low. So what happened? So I started investigating my credit, like what happened to it. And then within the investigation, that's when I found out that my credit, my credit went down because several credit cards were actually open on my name. And then I was like, okay. So I started investigating more into it. Then that's when I found out. I was like, well, all I'm saying is, at the end of the day, and it wasn't only my credit card. It was, I think, in the sense, it was more like to destabilize me financially. It wasn't even because anyone knows if you open several credit cards in somebody's name, it will hit their credit. And the credit in this country, for sure, is a type of financial stability, because if you have a really good credit, you can go and purchase certain things, right? And you can get access to certain things to make sure that financially you're stable, or it can build the financial stability, right? Obtaining those things with the credit. So therefore, I was thinking that it wasn't just, so it was more like because the bullying, the cyberbullying, That's emotional. That's emotional. And the financial, that's financial abuse right there too. Because, oh, to put me in a hardship through my credit. That is the type of abuse. Especially credit that I worked for without nobody helping me do it. Nothing in my life was given to me free. Any and everything that I had to work hard to get it. And my grandmother for sure taught us that even though I only stayed with her for 3 years and I had to move from family members to family members' houses, different homes, one thing I have learned at my grandmother's house is life will never give you nothing for nothing. You have to work for it. And I had to make sure that I did that. To work on my credit, to get my degrees, to get whatever that I have gotten in my life. Nobody has given it to me for free. But again, when people don't know where you're coming from, they don't know your background, they prejudge. They judge a book by its cover, thinking that they actually know who you are, where you came from. And sometimes those are also insecurities because people don't know what you went through. So therefore, they did not see the sleepless nights. They did not see the nights that you spent crying. They did not see the struggles. They did not see the nighttime jobs that you had. They did not see none of the stuff you had to actually get the life that you got when they met you. But they prejudge that you got it easy. Even if they don't prejudge you got it easy, just try to attack somebody that you don't even know. Just for what reason? I don't see it. Again, when we're not healed, all kind of other feelings can be intertwined and become the reasons why we do what we do. So therefore, it is very important for us to heal. And that's the very reason why I will keep posting these videos. Because people need to heal. Because again, people you do not even know. I don't know these people. It was an entire city, literally, that has made up lies. An entire family members, friends, community, right? That made up lies on my name. I don't know these people. I never met them. But they obviously think that they know who I am. Through lies, fabricated lies. So at the end of the day, again, it's just that. And I hope that this content honestly helps as many people as possible, because when I started my healing journey, I wish I could find one content that I could actually relate to and just use it to work on the different things without having to read books, without having to just go on Google so much, right? So I just hope that this helps, because there are a lot, many of us need healing. Many of us need healing. And I do believe that I really do believe that we do healing. We need healing. We need to do our healing. And something that struck me actually not very long ago, I was reading an article that was talking about how there is a narcissistic epidemic going on nowadays. And I had to read how the article was talking about the narcissist and empath paradigm. And it was also talking about actually how the empath and narcissist, they both pretty much originate from the same environment. Both originate from the same environment, but some people become narcissists. Some people become empaths, right? And what makes us turn one direction instead of the other one? So therefore, we have to think about that. The same thing when it comes to healing. When it comes to healing, What makes some people want to heal? To be able to actually sit down and think about, you know what? I think I need to sit down on my butt and literally listen to myself and see why I'm hurting and be able to go within and see what I need to do to heal. And some people decide, well, I'm not going to heal. I'm just going to do what I like, who I am. I'm not doing none of that. So sometimes we have to kind of sit down and think about, like, what makes some people go in one direction instead of the other direction. Now, I know every one of us have a time in our lives that something pushes us to actually want to do it, right? But then sometimes we have to also understand that we shouldn't always wait for something to push us to do it, especially when we know we have childhood wounds, we have wounds that were stuck on us, after a certain abuse, even in adulthood. Once we get out of abusive environments, abusive relationships, we end up with all these woundings that need to be worked on. We need to work on those wounds, right? So instead of us sitting and not wanting to actually address them and thinking, oh, that relationship is over, I'm good. We need to be able to sit down and think about, when I got into that relationship, was that the best version of me getting in that relationship compared to now that I'm out of it? Or am I the worst version of me now compared to when I got in there? So we have to kind of have a reference point to go back to and be like, hey, when I was in that relationship, was I really, when I got in, did I lose myself? And when I got out, I left my pieces, parts of me actually, in that relationship. And those parts of us that we actually lost is very important to be able to pinpoint them. Like, which pieces did we lose? And that's kind of a reference point, a reference for us. That's actually a way for us to know what went wrong also in that relationship and what some of the trauma is actually located within us, and be able to go back and actually work on those things. If it's a self-worth thing, if it's self-love, if it's self-esteem, if it's whatever it is, if it's confidence, right? Certain insecurities, body insecurities, right? Because if we're with a narcissistic relationship or certain emotional abusers, the biggest thing is the body image. Let's go ahead and attack the body image. The body image, will attack it. And then the body image being attacked, lower the self-esteem. The self-esteem goes low, so there the self-love and the self-worth follow, right? So that's the biggest thing for us to be able to sit down and pinpoint certain things and not just let things be. That's the biggest thing. Because that's how, again, we end up going from relationship to relationship, dragging our big suitcases of trauma, or the results of our trauma, the results of our wounding, into each relationship. And then think about it, right? If ever, let's say ever you're a runner, right? Or you're a runner, or you like jogging, or you like hiking. Because sometimes relationships feel like you hiking a mountain, right? Certain relationships. By the time you're actually a certain point in that relationship, you have no fuel to go. You're done. So let's say that you are in one relationship, and then you have this suitcase that every time you leave, so let's say you're a hiker, right? That's just a great example. You have this backpack that every couple miles you grab a couple of rocks and put them in the backpack. Every mile or two, you grab your some rocks and you put them in the bag. By the time you get to the last mile of your hiking trail, right, you would not have anything left in you to give to coming down from that mountain, right? That trail, that hiking trail. You would not have anything to go backward or to go in another direction to begin with. So think about it as same thing. Relationships, they're kind of the example of the mileages, right? Every time you do 1 or 2 miles, every time you have those rocks that you're taking with you from one relationship to the next one. Every relationship you go in, you add more rocks. You do not really get to a point where you tell yourself, let me take a break, let me sip some water, let me unload some of these rocks before I put in more rocks. So we just keep putting more rocks. By the time we get to the next relationship, you're too tired from this previous relationship and you bringing all these rocks with you. You're not getting yourself a breather. You're not getting yourself, so time to sip water. You're not giving yourself no time at all in between relationships. So you're going from relationship to relationship, grabbing rocks from one relationship to next relationship, and, breaking your back in the process. So we have to be mindful of that. And that right there is one thing that will help us even with family and friends and all kind of relationships, right? Not to bring our hurt and dumping into other people. Because from what I know, I don't even know these people. I really don't. I never seen them. I don't know what they look like. I don't know their names. I don't know nothing about them. If it was in that thing, I've seen it on social media, I wouldn't even know this was going on. So at the end of the day, we need to heal. That's all I'm saying. And that's just what I'm saying. Now, I'm not asking nobody to go heal. I'm not asking nobody to go do it. I'm saying, I'm on my journey to make sure I do not dump my trauma on other people. First of all, I do not keep my trauma to myself, right? And stay at a lower level or lower, I would say, I would not be able to expand in life if I stay in my trauma. I know that because it's just a way to sabotage myself, to stay in depression or anxiety or, low self-esteem or all those things that people unfortunately sustain or gain in a negative way through abusive relationships, right? Or through trauma. So therefore, I know if I just stay in my hurt, in my unhealed self, I stay in my, just me not being healed, I know that I'm sabotaging myself because I will not be able to be the best of me. I will not be able to expand. So therefore, I know I need to heal. So, and I'm not asking nobody to go heal, but I'm saying that healing will stop people in general, me included, from spreading my hurt to other people, especially people I don't know. So I'll go ahead and stop it here for now. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, please take care of yourself. Bye-bye.